Welcome everyone to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. Privileged to have you back with us. If you're joining us for the first time, you might like to know that we are the UK's leading pro-marriage organisation. And what that means for us is that we support this concept of one man, one woman marriage. And as I often say in these things, that doesn't mean other things don't exist in a democratic society. In a pluralistic, liberal democracy, clearly they do. We can see them all around us. But the thing that we're concerned with is the uniqueness, the special nature of one man, one woman marriage, the family that forms, the contribution that makes to society, the value it has for adults, for men, for women, the superb value it brings to children and their upbringing, and also the impact on society. And all the research supports the value of that. And that's not to say that those other things aren't valid or that they don't mean a lot to the people involved in them. Of course they do. But there's something very special that only one man and one woman marriage provides. And we're here to support that structure of a family, if you like, on a population basis and its value. And when I mention the word family, as another organisation from whom it's a real privilege to have a guest today to talk to us about that organisation. That organisation is the Family Education Trust, and our guest today is Piers Shepherd. Piers, would you like to say hello?
Hi, Tony. Thank you very much for having me on. I'm Piers Shepherd, the Senior Researcher at the Family Education Trust, and I'm delighted to be on your programme.
Great. Piers, it's such a privilege to talk to you because I think the work that you and your organisation do is just completely superb and so valuable, and it's a real joy to be able to tell more people about it. And people will of course have heard of your former director, Norman Wells, who was one of our own board members here at the Coalition for Marriage, and we've got a couple of interviews on his life and his work earlier on. But it's a joy to talk to you about how the FET is going forward. Now, if I can start off a little bit, came across your organisation recently in a speech by Miriam Cates, Member of Parliament. And Miriam was holding a Westminster debate around some of the things that are being taught in schools, some of the unhelpful things that are being taught in schools around LGBT ideology and some of the excesses maybe that seem to be taking place. And one of the sources for evidence that she highlighted was the Family Education Trust. And it was a joy to hear your guys' names mentioned there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to be mentioned by Miriam Cates, a little bit more about what you do, what the background of the organisation is, and maybe your remit, etc.
Maybe I'll start off by maybe talking about what we do as an organisation. So we've existed now for just over 50 years. We were founded out of a concern about the breakdown of the married family and the consequences of casual sexual behaviour following the sexual revolution in the 60s and 70s. And this was having a very negative effect on the welfare of children and young people. So an organisation was set up to basically to combat these things from an evidence-based perspective. And we don't focus on a single issue because we believe that the issues affecting marriage and family are multiple. So we give time and attention to a range of areas that affect the stability of the family and the welfare of children and young people. We were in touch with Miriam Cates because, well, she initially, the contact was made by her. She invited us to contribute to a meeting of the New Social Covenant Unit, which is a think tank which she's involved with, and that was actually a meeting to do with childcare. We asked to contribute to that, but that was our first meeting with Miriam, and so from then we were in touch with her. We asked that if we could meet with her to discuss relationships and sex education, and she very kindly received myself and Lucy Marsh, our communications officer, and Dr. Julie Maxwell, who's one of our trustees. We went to meet Miriam at Portcullis House, and she asked us if we could provide a briefing for her on sex education materials, because she'd initiated the debate in Parliament on that issue, on the issue of sex education materials. So we provided her a briefing and a list of some of the really awful materials that are being used in some schools, and she made use of that in the parliamentary debate and made quite substantial use of it, which we were very pleased to see.
And let's get this out straight away, Piers. Nobody is saying anybody should ever suffer any kind of persecution or detriment based on their sexuality or their sexual preferences or whatever sex they are, and nothing like that at all. Just tell us a little bit, however, about the evidence that you presented to Miriam and why that seems to have gone kind of beyond what you might think is reasonable and acceptable by the Education Act, etc.
So one of the things that we presented to Miriam was the sexual behaviours traffic light tool, which has been promoted by the Brook organisation. And this talks about what is appropriate sexual behaviour based on age, and it effectively gives a green light to sexual behaviour by those as young as 13. Brook now claim they've changed this, but they don't say how, and there's no way of finding out because they put it behind a paywall. But the fact is the original version is still being used in schools and being used by local authorities. We also presented some of the materials used by BISH training, which is really obscene things to do with rough sex and kink and that kind of thing. We presented materials promoted by Family Planning Association, the Proud Trust, one of the Proud Trust dice game in which pupils are asked to roll a dice and it comes up with the names of body parts, and they're then asked to discuss the sexual behaviours related to those body parts. So some really bad stuff.
And of course, this is often promoted to very young children.
Yeah.
And you know, not necessarily age appropriate, and certainly not necessarily in accordance with what their parents might want them to be exposed to at that age. So I think I can see very well why you did that. And you've mentioned, I mean, I have a real privilege in my job because we focus here at the Coalition for Marriage on the one thing, and because of that one thing, we have tens of thousands of supporters on our mail basis from up and down the country and further afield from all faiths and none. So, you know, it's lots of different types of people. And when I have the privilege of going around the country and I've met personally thousands of people now, they come from all different types of background. And I understand that's the same for FET. Would that be correct? So you've got all sorts of members from all sorts of different backgrounds.
Oh, yes. We're very, very broad from a whole range of cultural and religious and different political backgrounds. Yes, we're a very broad organisation, and that's reflected in our supporters, our board of trustees, and our staff.
Tell me a little bit more about the organisation in terms of where does your balance lie between, let's say, campaigning or lobbying or grassroots support, or maybe the kind of think tank type thing? Where would you place yourselves in that kind of category?
I guess there's a kind of a cross of all those things. I mean, in terms of campaigning, because we don't have any political or religious affiliations, we're not involved in sort of direct political lobbying, but we get involved in campaigns in relation, for example, to inappropriate sex education. We write to ministers and chairs of school governors and others with influence in that area. We were involved recently in the campaign about the Drag Queen Story Hour. We created a template letter that parents can download from our website and can send to their local library if it happens to be hosting one of these events. We campaigned against the Family Sex Show, theatrical show that was developed by the School of Sexuality Education and featured naked actors for children as young as 5. We were involved in campaigning against that. We provided information for the Citizen Go petition, which got over 40,000 signatures and resulted in the show's tour being cancelled. And then we've got involved in our various other campaigns on the sex education issue, where you've got particularly nasty examples of RSE being introduced into schools. Because we're not directly political, we don't do direct political lobbying, but we have we meet with sympathetic MPs and ministers. I mentioned, we talked about Miriam Cates. We also met with Baroness Nicholson, and we did research for her on transgender issues. She wanted us to produce evidence of gender ideology being promoted in schools, so we sent her a large dossier of information on that. In terms of sort of more grassroots work, give advice to parents and teachers. A lot of parents struggling with sex education programs in their schools, we've given them advice, sometimes maybe help them to draft a letter to the school. In a few cases, we've even accompanied parents to a meeting with their school's head teacher as a kind of moral support. And we've done the same thing with home education. We've advised parents about their right to home educate their children if they decide that's the right thing, and what their rights are under the law. And then in terms of a think tank, you could also call us that, because we produce evidence-based material on family issues. Our most recent publication is this one, Gender Ideology and Our Children. We respond to government consultations on family issues and try to influence public policy in that way. We've also been asked a few times to give evidence to parliamentary committees. And most recently, we did this on the conversion therapy ban. We were asked by the Qualities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee of the Scottish Parliament to give evidence to that committee on why the conversion therapy ban is not a very good idea, and its bad effect on families and children.
So you work across all of the home countries, do you?
Yes, we do.
Tell us a little bit more about some of the other stuff you've done previously as an organisation that I understand a lot of it is still available and people might want to avail themselves of it.
If I were to sort of highlight, I guess, a few landmarks in the history of FET. So one of our major publications, possibly our most widely read one over the years, has been the one called Sex Education or Indoctrination. That originally began, it was originally published as a short booklet called Sex and Social Engineering in the 1980s, but over the years it's been updated, expanded, and more information has been added, and it's been translated into about 12 languages. And that talks about basically the history of the sex education movement and the use of sex education as a tool of social engineering and of indoctrination. We also, in the 1990s, we produced a publication which was very influential called Broken Homes and Battered Children, which studied the relationship between family structure and child abuse, and specifically focused on how the married family is the most healthy, safest environment for children, and that families with abuse are disproportionately concentrated in households of single parents or cohabiting couples. But the reason why this report was very influential, it was particularly influential in the United States, where the United States National Incidence Study of Child Abuse and Neglect began to start measuring child abuse by family structure, which it hadn't done previously, but that was because of this publication. As you know, we were involved in the founding of the Coalition for Marriage, in circulating the petition against the redefinition of marriage, in delivering that petition to Downing Street, and we've cooperated with the coalition in co-publishing the Marriage and Divorce in the Liberal Imagination on no-fault divorce issue.
Yeah, a very good booklet, lots of information, lots of research, links, etc., etc. Recommend it to people. We'll put it in the description.
And another landmark publication of ours was Unprotected, which was looked at serious case reviews on sexual abuse in different local authorities and revealed the complacency to underage sexual activity that allowed a widespread sexual abuse to occur. And we linked that in with basically sexual abuse had been perpetuated by an attitude that regarded underage sexual activity as a normal part of growing up, combined with confidential provision of contraception to under 16s, disregarding parental concerns, and confidentiality was put above child protection. And we've sent that publication to to politicians, police chiefs, heads of local safeguarding boards, and that's all. Whenever we write to a minister about a particular sex education program, we always send them a copy of that publication.
Just on that publication, because that's a very important publication, but it was written a number of years ago now, and everything in it is still extant. The problems are still there and haven't been addressed. So what's going wrong? I mean, I suppose my question is, does anybody care about what you guys do and what we do? Are we on the wrong path? Does society just want something different and we should really get with the program and shut up?
Sometimes it seems that way, but one thing that has been noted since, that was published in 2017, but there have been a few more recent serious case reviews. I think there was one from Newcastle, which have said that Gillett competence should be reviewed, and that, this idea that children who are not old enough to be having sexual intercourse should be provided with contraception. There's basically a contradiction in the law, and this practice of prescribing contraception to people who are underage should really be reviewed. So we're starting to see that in a number of more recent serious case reviews. So perhaps there is some concern now being shown. And it's also good now that there are people, for example, in Parliament, like Miriam Cates, who are raising this issue very strongly and repeatedly in Parliament.
You mentioned the Social Covenant Unit, which was set up by Danny Kruger, and we've got an interview somewhere on a YouTube channel with Danny Kruger talking about that. But again, and there's a number of, not a large number, but a number of MPs part of that Social Covenant Unit, which covers similar sorts of grounds to the ones that you and I might be talking about in our day jobs, but only a tiny number. And so I do wonder, what's your feeling, Piers, as to where we're coming from, what we're talking about, why there seems to be a reluctance for a wider conversation about these things?
One of the major ideas of the sexual revolution is that sexual activity is a completely morally neutral activity. The only thing that is required is consent, and as long as there's consent, then that is sufficient, and that's its principle is extended even to people who are underage. When we look at these things, I think a light is being shined on that, and it's showing that there is actually an extra moral element, and a lot of people don't want to face that. I think also there's lobby groups like the LGBT lobby, especially groups like Stonewall, that feel if we were to look too closely into that area, that perhaps people may question whether certain types of lifestyles are as great as they're cracked up to be.
You touch on there an interesting point, because I'm speaking at a conference today, tomorrow, the day after, and the venue of the conference has not yet been announced, simply because if it's announced too early, it'll get cancelled, because a lot of people will ring up the venue and say, we're going to come and hold objections, and you're going to have to hire more security and you can't afford that, so you better kick those people out. And there is a degree to which actually everyone is equal, in a liberal democracy, and everyone has equal standing to everyone else and is of infinite worth and all that stuff. But actually people feel very differently about different things, and in order to get a proper liberal democracy working, we need to be able to tolerate each other's views and to have discussion without dissent and without cancelling people, and you know what I mean, that kind of just normal conversation, evidence-based conversation. And there seems to be a reluctance to allow that sort of thing to happen, and I think all we're saying is, look, let's just allow that, because some things, you're right, on an evidence base are actually seen to be more effective on a population basis than others, and more helpful than others. And that's not to say that other things aren't valid or shouldn't exist. based on whatever civil society decides, but actually let's allow everyone to have their say in a reasonable and respectful manner. You picked up an issue there, a lot of things about the trans stuff that's going on, and there is an awful lot of stuff. There's big debate and all sorts of things going on inside and outside Parliament and in society more generally. But a lot of your stuff previously seemed to focus on the LGB side of the LGBT discussion, but now it all seems to be trans. Does that mean the LGB isn't a problem anymore?
I mean, this issue has moved on so fast. The trans thing has become huge in the last few years, and I suppose that's an issue that's really affecting young people because there's been such a huge increase in young people presenting for gender dysphoria, and of course not all of the LGB community is comfortable with that.
That's right.
Our position is what it's always been, which is that marriage between a man and a woman is the ideal relationship. We don't regret the fact that we opposed the redefinition of marriage. We do the same thing again. The lifestyle, or the LGB lifestyle, is not, I think, if you look at the objective evidence, not a particularly healthy one. Same-sex marriage is a very recent phenomenon, really. I don't think that we will ever really see that is going to be a good thing for society. I think that marriage between man and woman is the gold standard that needs to be upheld.
Yeah, and just picking this apart a little bit, because it is important, because what you've said there would get you labelled as a homophobe and a bigot. But frankly, that's not the case. I mean, I think I speak for you when I say that actually we believe people should be able to live the lives they want to live and do the things and to enjoy the respect of others and not to be discriminated against based on, their lifestyles or the preferences. None of that absolutely whatsoever. But that's very different to public policy in the way it is doing these days, influencing wider society. Now, you look at seatbelts, for example, and you look at smoking. Now, the campaigns and the public policy changes people's behaviour. Now, when you pick apart marriage and you say that, well, marriage is just about, it's kind of love is love, it's whoever you like, whoever likes who can marry whoever likes who. Well, that really influences marriage. It undermines marriage. It takes away the fact that marriage is something greater than the two people involved. It's a commitment to society. It's building something that generates the best version of the next generation, like nothing else does. And that's really, really valuable. And when you mess with that, you mess with a much bigger picture. We often talk about the analogy of, salt being sodium and chlorine. And the fact that that's the case isn't phobic to any other chemical or any other compound. It just is. And when you confuse that with things that look like salt, love is love, white powdery stuff is white powdery stuff, well, you're going to get a lot of confusion in society, and what we're saying is not that other white powders aren't valuable. Of course they are, but salt has a specific purpose. Let's not redefine it. Let's recognize it for the value it has, and let's promote it for what it does. And that doesn't mean you undermine anything else, for goodness sake, not at all. So people shouldn't refer to you as homophobic or bigoted, because a bigot is somebody who has an opinion and refuses to listen to anybody else. And that's not you, Piers. That really isn't you.
You'll see, you will see that if you've been to our conferences, that we invite a very broad range of people to speak at our conferences. And they aren't necessarily people who would agree with us on everything. We discuss such a wide range of topics. And we've had criticism. We've had criticism from people because they say, why did you invite this person? He's not in line with what you think about this issue. And we always say, well, it's never been a criteria for somebody to speak at our conference that they have to agree with us on every issue. We invite people because they have something very helpful and useful to contribute on a particular issue that is of concern to, in terms of marriage, family, education, whatever it might be.
Yeah, excellent work. And where it kind of makes me wonder, where are the boundaries of your work? I mean, you don't have as far as I can tell, a written limitation on what you will look at and what you won't look at. So I'm just wondering, notionally, where would you not go, for example?
I think we're concerned with all issues that relate to marriage, the family, the welfare of children and young people.
So, I mean, I know there've been some comments about the composition of the workforce, women versus men,
Yeah,
tax system allowing mums, if they want to stay at home, so they don't have to go back to work as quickly as they otherwise might feel obliged to, or don't even have to go back at all if they want to stay at home with the kids, etc., etc. So you might get involved in that, but you wouldn't get involved in things like equal pay or anything else like that.
yes, I mean that wouldn't really be our issue.
That kind of gives us a feel, and who knows what's around the corner for you to get into. So perhaps that moves us on a little bit to what sort of priorities have you got going forward? What are you working on now? What do you think you'll be working on in the near future?
Well, obviously, an ongoing concern is RSE, the abuses of RSE, supporting parents in relation to that area, making sure that schools are accountable to parents, and that as far as possible, parents can withdraw their children. That's unfortunately now being compromised, but we still try to support parents in that. And we also try to highlight healthy resources that can be used in RSE. Another concern, a current concern, is that the upcoming schools bill. We're very concerned about this because of the restrictions that, the mandatory register of home educated children, also the greater restrictions it would seem to put on independent schools. And we haven't really written a lot. We've posted some things on social media about that, but we're hoping to put something soon on our website about that, and in our next bulletin. The conversion therapy ban is something that we're very concerned about, the effect that would have on families and children, that parents could fall foul of that law if they speak to their child in a particular way about those sorts of sexual orientation or gender identity. The transgender issue is an ongoing concern. The move towards self-definition of gender, that's something we're strongly opposed to. And we look forward to the government bringing out this guidance, which they've now postponed, on how schools should deal with these issues. I think we're going to write to the Minister for Education to basically say, what we think should go into that guidance when it comes out, and give some kind of guideline to that. And we also, as I mentioned, we published this recent booklet, Gender Ideology in Our Children, specifically to help parents combat gender ideology in school. And that can be downloaded from our website.
Okay, we'll put your website on the screen and in the description too.
And then in terms of things for the future, we're wanting to increase our public profile, and we've done this in a big way through social media, thanks to our excellent communications officer. We've massively increased our presence on Facebook and Twitter. Only 2 years ago, we had less than 100 Twitter followers. We're now well into the thousands. And we're trying to strengthen our base of volunteers. We want to have website support pages for parents and school governors. And at some point in the next few years, we'd quite like to reach out to the younger generation and perhaps create something like a youth panel for FET. But most of all, we intend to go on fighting on the issues that we've always fought on. I think one of the great things about our organisation is that we haven't compromised on the issues. We've never watered things down. We have the same principles now we had 50 years ago, and we intend to fight on.
Well, Piers, it's such a privilege to talk to you. I know we know each other, we work with each other regularly, but I'm really glad to be able to tell other people a lot more about your organisation. It's very valuable. Carry on the great work, and perhaps we'll have you back sometime in the future to tell us more about what you're doing and its marvellous effect. Piers Shepherd, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me on.